Mr. Mast.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to talk diplomacy because that's what we do here in this committee. And hands down, one of the biggest things asked, I think probably to all of us, either side of the aisle, is what are you doing? We see China visits Russia, Russia pulls out of New START. We see balloons flying over America. We see China testing hypersonics. And the question constantly is, what are you doing? And one of those forms of diplomacy that we have to deal with this is the entity list, correct? I mean, that's one of the ways that we help deal with this, to say, listen, you can't get the nut, the screw, the bolt, the epoxy, the semiconductor, the pencil to draw it up if that's what we decide. You can't get what you need, Chinese, Communist Party company. You can't get what you need to make those things that threaten America or our allies, because we're going to put you on a list, correct? Correct understanding, Mr. Estevez?
I wouldn't call it a tool of diplomacy, but correct understanding.
You wouldn't say, I look at diplomacy in this way, and I always ask this question is, does our support equal our policy goals? So if we're allowing somebody to get something, that's a form of support. If we're stopping them from getting something, those are diplomatic efforts, right?
Close.
All right, well, I'll take that. You said close. We'll say it's close. So, sir, Mr. Estevez, looking at those entity lists, I'll call it a form of diplomacy, whether we're going to let Chinese Communist Party entities get the supplies that they need to build things that are a threat to America, America's allies, and Americans. In order to do that, this list, how many have you published in the last year? How many have you recommended to go up to the Federal Register? I know you talked about 12 recently.
We've put 160 entities on the entity list since the beginning of this administration. That's about a quarter of the entities in the PRC. And the entity list goes back to the 90s.
Very good. So when we look at this, and I want to bring Wendy Sherman into the conversation and say, it's been the conversation, I believe, from Wendy Sherman that state agrees with the action, you guys having the end user review for that. But there's really somebody higher than you all, and that's whether it's Mr. Crittenbrink or Wendy Sherman or Blinken. They might ultimately decide if those end user reviews are going to be put into the Federal Register, correct?
There's an interagency process. We never go up that high, to tell you the truth. Only 1.1% of discussions over licenses or entity lists even go up to the Assistant Secretary for adjudication, because usually there's pretty good consensus on what goes on the list,
right,
based on the evidence that we have.
There's a process, but even if you all recommend that review goes forward and put it on the register, if Secretary Blinken or Mr. Crittenbrink or Wendy Sherman decide they don't want that on there, that's not going on there, is it?
The process actually flows a little differently than that.
Mr. Crittenbrink, would you like to
respond? Once we have the vote, we put people on the list.
Congressman, yes, thank you. I think we collaborate exceptionally well with our colleagues at Commerce, and not just Commerce, but Energy and DOD as well, who are also part of this process. And our goal is to do exactly what you've outlined. The entities list is designed to prevent China or other actors from acquiring U.S. technology inappropriately or to use for their military modernization in ways that would threaten our interests. So
let's
we're very
ask a
supportive of that effort.
Question on that then.
Yes, sir.
Since I'm glad we have both of you sitting here. So how many PRC entities have passed that end user review, the committee, that have not been published yet?
I'm not aware of any.
None.
None.
Very good. That'd be great to hear. Do you want to consult with your staff and make sure that that's the case? Anybody behind you?
I don't have to do that.
Mr. Crittenbrink, are you familiar with any that Ms. Sherman might think that she agrees with the action but doesn't agree with the timing because it might piss off China?
Congressman, I would say that once a proposed entity listing is approved by these four agencies, this regulatory action in the ERC, it goes on the entity list. That is the process.
It doesn't just go there. You all have the opportunity to pull that back as higher leadership in the State Department.
I think what I would say, Congressman, is that we feel like our job, the reason why we have this consultative body is to sit down these 4 agencies and to think through all of the implications. Is this proposed action going to achieve our goals? Is it potentially going to inadvertently harm our own interests or the interests of allies and partners? We have to think through all of those things. But once we reach consensus and we vote, those actions go forward and are published on the entities list.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.